All right, Donnie, can you guys hear? And Ben, can you hear? Oh, you can hear. Okay, you're muted, but I'm happy you're joining us. Um, it is wonderful to see everyone, or be connected. Hopefully, we'll be able to share some wonderful Torah together. Wanted to again, and I apologize to the Green family, and that this is going to be a little bit of recap what you may have heard last night. But I wanted to talk about what I see as an interesting moral quandary, dilemma, which I'll just share briefly with you in terms of a text. Let's see here. Here we go. Let's see if that works. Where the questions that are uniquely connected to this week's parsha actually come to a broader discussion. And let me frame it in the following way. So Rashi at the beginning of the parsha mentions that there is a vav, which is the Hebrew letter connoting the word and. And the parsha starts with, these are the laws and the statutes, and it starts listing a whole corpus of rules and regulations, mostly relating to the laws of torts and damages. Well, you'll see here in the text what that refers to. But the concept of a tort and a damage is all the mundane, detailed, day-to-day life type of issues that come up. You know what? People bang into each other. People make mistakes. They hurt each other. They say things, whatever they do. And the Torah says that that's connected with the word and. What's it connected to? Well, what happened last week's parsha was the momentous spiritual awakening of the Har Sinai experience, which was seemingly a very transcendent, major, big, thunder and lightning, God in a cloud and all that stuff, which seems so spiritual and so deeply connected to the ethereal and the beyond. And what Rashi tells us is that those are two sides of the same coin. That at the same time, in the same way that Jewish religion has transcendent spiritual experiences, it's not a different life than somebody who deals with every day. You got to deal with this person who hurt you and this person who had, who damaged you, who paid this money and that money, etc. That so that's the unique message that Rashi tells us, that the idea here is something connected to the connectedness of Jewish law, that the spiritual and the physical are interconnected. Now let's take a look. Actually, before I even share this, I'm going to stop that. Let's take a look just at the psukim, because we're going to get to, I think, an interesting halachic thing. So let's take a look for a moment, and I'll just pull up the text of the parsha. Here, and I can put it both in Hebrew and English. Let's see if this wants to work for me. There we go. And let's take a look here. This is just from, by the way, a great resource, the Chabad website, where they have all the Torah, Hebrew, and English translated. And let's take a look here. So the Torah says, Parsha Mishpatim, chapter 21 in Exodus. Hopefully you can see it. Yes. And these, that was the and that we talked about. And these are the ordinances you shall set before them, the laws of a slave, and very detailed laws about how, buying and selling. Let's keep going. 12 psukim. All right. The rules of, if you strike a man so that he dies, right? Capital punishment for murder. Then the laws of an ir miklat, right? That's the concept of the city of refuge. And then it goes back and forth. You go to city refuge if you did this type of murder and that kind of murder, cursing a parent, fighting with a parent. The question of, do you have to pay the fees, the medical fees for somebody you damaged, right? You have to pay for the person's lost work. You have to pay for the cure of the medicine that they need to the person who is injured, right? This is where we learn about an eye for an eye, the laws of a shor nagach, the laws of a goring bull, and the amount that you pay if you break into someone's if you break into someone, if you home, if you steal something and you have to pay double, you pay twofold or pay fourfold. Really, very practical and again mundane laws. But I would just take an extra step in saying we're talking about murder, right? We're talking about theft. We're talking about inflicted emotional distress. We're talking about medical bills. How far does that seem from the God appearing on the top of a mountain in a cloud with thunder and lightning? This transcendently spiritual experience seems so far away from everything we just said, right? The laws of throwing stones and what you do when you damage and what you do when you steal and paying 4 times and 5 times. It just seems so far away from that. And so Rashi tells us, though, that they're still part of the same corpus of law. They're part of the same mindset. But what I want to try and dig a little bit deeper about, and again, I apologize to Rabbi Green who heard some of this last night, want to dig a little deeper about is this notion of what exactly is a tort, right? The laws of damages that we just mentioned, and again, hopefully you're seeing the right thing. Let's just make sure that the right thing is up on the screen here. There we go. Okay, so what is a tort? Not a dessert. Those are delicious. But a tort is, and this is the legal definition, right? I don't know if I'm pointing up or down or whatever on your screen towards where the paper is. A wrongful act, other than a breach of contract, that injures another. And this is a key word that I want to focus on, and for which the law permits a civil, meaning non-criminal, action to be brought. A civil, non-criminal action to be brought. Relief may be obtained, and this is from a legal dictionary, in the form of damages or an injunction. The term derives from the Latin tortum, meaning something twisted, wrung, or crooked. Let me try and explain that in layman terms that I understand, because that's a little bit gobbledygook for me. But I spend some time trying to distill what it's trying to say. And that is that a tort is a type of law that is not about right and wrong. Usually, and that's, I would say, the difference between criminal and civil law. A criminal issue is a tort, meaning something that, I'm sorry, criminal issue is something where we are judging you because we say you've done something bad. You've done something evil, right? Think about the words I'm saying, bad, evil. These are value judgments. So if someone commits murder, they go to jail. Why do they go to jail? Because we say they are either in need of rehabilitation or murder. It's a judgment on the morality of their action. Criminal law is essentially a moral judgment, right? It's saying you are a criminal. It's labeling you. You are a criminal. You are done something bad, something wrong. You need to be punished. But it's labeling the action. What is a tort? According to this legal dictionary, this, by the way, is basis of American law. A tort is a wrongful act, other than a breach of contract, and it's an injury you do to somebody else or to their property, but we deal with it in a different way. It is a non-criminal action. The court case again, is not a criminal court, and if you, as we know, right, in the American system, there is the civil court and the criminal court. Criminal court is where you have a judge and a jury deciding if you're a bad person or a good person in the same way, or at least the act that you did was bad or good. Here, we're not talking about whether it's bad or good. We're talking about whether you have to pay money or don't pay money, right? Relief may be obtained in the form of damages or an injunction. Now, fascinatingly, it derives from the term Latin tortum, meaning something twisted, wrung, or crooked, which sounds like it is something bad. But the core here is that this is not a value judgment. This is not saying this is a bad thing to do or a wrong thing to do. It's a, you have to pay money. You have to do something to fix what you broke. But it's not judging you as a person because you're not going to get any physical punishment. And you're not defined as someone who has done something wrong. The punishment for a civil action is never going to be capital or corporal punishment, right? Although there used to be something called debtor's prison, we don't have that. But the concept of a tort is we're not asking, and I'll use Hebrew terms here, we're not asking was it asur or mutar, permitted or forbidden, but rather we're saying, are you chayav or patur? Are you liable or not liable? Now, Suzanne, I know it looks like you have something to add. Go ahead. You need to unmute so I can hear you. Go ahead.
Isn't the intent sometimes good or bad?
Well, that's interesting in that in a civil law, we care about your intent only to the extent to which we will make you seem as negligent, as having to pay for what you've done wrong. But let me ask you in a slightly different case, a slightly different formality, the same thing. We're not going to talk about halacha yet. In American law, does somebody who is liable, is there a law on the books that they have to have broken? Have they broken the law? For example, you have a car accident, right? Two people get into a car accident. And the judge goes and reviews the case, or the police officer, whomever reviews the case, and says, oh, it's, Jack is to pay and Jill, Jack is liable and Jill is exempt, is not liable. Has Jack necessarily broken a law? Or do we just say he was negligent and it's his fault and Jill was not negligent and it's not her fault, so Jack has to pay Jill money? Are we saying that Jack broke the law or not? Does there have to be a law on the books that Jack broke? Or is it just that he didn't drive as carefully as Jill did, and therefore he's going to have to pay for the damage he's done? Right? It's the difference, by the way, between sometimes we say that there is criminal liability. So, for example, if you get into a car accident and there was a judgment that you were drunk, and therefore you broke the law, thou shalt not drink and drive, you might have to pay for whatever damage you've done, but you also have to go to jail and get arrested for driving under the influence. And, there was actually a very famous case recently in Northern California where, and the law in the state of California is, fairly clear that if you are driving under, there was a fellow who was driving under the influence. He killed someone in the car accident, and as they were driving, he banged into somebody else, and they literally stubbed their toe. But the law in California says that you get X number of years for vehicular manslaughter, for killing someone with a car, and for every other person who was damaged, you get another year. So the fellow ended up getting an extra year because the person who stubbed their toe. That's an issue of criminal law. That's saying we see that you have committed an even more severe crime because somebody else got hurt, and therefore you got an extra year in jail. And it didn't take into account whether the person was hurt a lot or hurt a little, whatever. That's just that's criminal law. Civil law just says, okay, you caused this person X number of dollars of damage to his car, and X number of dollars of medical bills, and so you got to reimburse them for that loss. It's not about a law you have broken or not broken. So that's been the difference between civil and criminal law, right? That there are different ways of assessing how we react to your action. And as we say, a tort means that you've done something crooked. And what I mean by crooked is that you need to now straighten it, right? There was something that was straight, you made it crooked, so you got to figure out how to make it whole and straighten it again. As opposed to a criminal law, if you think about it the opposite, criminal law doesn't fix anything, right? If you hurt somebody, if you commit assault, and then they throw you in jail, the person isn't any less assaulted, right? The person's wounds aren't fixed. It's just that we have a judgment as a society that you need to be punished for your action. I want to try and extrapolate that same question to Jewish law, right? We just read in Parshat Mishpatim a whole series of very detailed torts and damages. And we'll put it back up again. Let's see if I can. I can try and get it back up there. Let's see, Mishpatim, here we go. Let's just, right? So, again, you have here, if you open a pit, יפתח איש בור או יכרה איש בור, ולא יחסנו, ונפל שם השור החמור, בעל הבור ישלם כסף ישיב לבעלה, והמת יהיה. If a person opens a pit, right? The famous story of בור ברשות הרבים, a Hebrew a phrase, a pit in a public domain. And you don't cover it, and a bull or a donkey falls into it. Well, what does it say? The owner of the pit shall pay, right? Nowhere does it say, thou shalt not dig a pit and leave it uncovered. So if we ask this fellow who dug the pit, did he do something wrong? Did he do something criminal? Or did he do something tortious? I don't know. I think there's maybe an attorney or two on the share. They can weigh in exactly how the phraseology and the methodology is. But right, it says if a person opens a pit or a person digs a pit and does not cover it, it doesn't say you are a bad man. It doesn't say lo ta'aseh, thou shalt this. So it just says that if a donkey or a bull falls into it, the owner of the pit shall pay. So again, we go to our philosophical question here. Have you done something wrong, or you done something that you're liable for? Meaning, if you think about it in a different way, if you dig such a pit, but nobody falls in, is there anything wrong? You know, you're lucky. You don't have to pay any money. You're lucky. But are you bad? Have you violated one of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah? It's a really interesting case, and it's known by the overarching concept of what's called the Isur Lehazik. Is there a prohibition to damage someone? Right? So let's see if I can find here we go. If a man steals a bull or a lamb and slaughters it or sells it, he shall 5 cattle, right? It's called tashlumei arba v'chamisha, right? So if you steal a bull or a lamb, here there's a joy because we know that there's a prohibition, lo tignov, right? Thou shalt not steal. So we know that. But here there's this big extra punishment. Or if we look at another example, let's see. Right, the laws of Shomer. The man gives his neighbor a donkey or a bull or a lamb or any animal for safekeeping, and it dies. Breaks a limb or is captured. You have to take a shvuah. But if it's stolen, you pay this. And if it's torn apart, you do that. And all of these things, okay? Is there a prohibition here? So let me give you a case. I go and I take my kid's baseball bat and I walk over to your car and I smash your front window. I'm not very nice, okay? I will have to pay you a whole bunch of money to replace your window. And maybe even I might have to pay in certain situations additional fines or liabilities. But which Aveira in the Torah have I violated? Is there a criminal aspect to civil law? Now, as we showed in the original legal dictionary, in American law, no. In American law, there is criminal law and civil law, and never the twain shall meet, right? That a tort is a non-criminal act. But we believe in a religious society. And then there's this idea of religious values. So the Torah has this concept of torts and damages, what you have to pay for. You have to pay one time or two times or double or triple or quarter. But have you committed a spiritual crime, right? Which of the 613 mitzvot have you violated? Again, so if you look, and this is just from an interesting legal article. Let's see if we can get this back here. Right? In most tort law, there is financial recourse. Hopefully, can you see this this document here? In most tort law, there is financial recourse. The questions are those of liability and not per se of wrongdoing. Let's just focus on those terms. It's liability, whether you have to pay or not, versus wrongdoing, whether you've done something bad or good. There is debate among contemporary legal scholars about the nature of torts and why there are costs associated with them. That's a law. That's a question for a different topic. But what about in Jewish law? Is it also true in halacha? If you open up a Gemara, Talmud, and tractate, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, right? There is huge volumes upon volumes of legal liability and the level of damages you have to pay. Is there a religious component to that discussion? If I damage you, and here's the key question, if I cause you damage, have I done an Aveira? That's what I want to think about. If I smash the vase, the beautiful, gorgeous vase that you had in your living room, I definitely have to replace the vase. I'm probably not such a nice guy, but have I done an Aveira? And if so, which one? Which one of the 613 mitzvot have I violated if I cause damage to someone else? And it's almost glaring that the Torah doesn't seem to address that. It only says if you smash the vase, you got to pay X, Y, and Z. Yes, Suzanne, go ahead.
What about Baltaschit?
Great. So there is an entire corpus of theories, at least seven theories about this concept, right? So, for example, the Mishnah Lamelech says something very, very wild. Listen to this. And we're going to get to Baltashit and your approach in a second. Let's look at the Mishnah Lamelech. The Mishnah Lamelech, right? And let me see if we can get it a little bit bigger. Hopefully you can see. Let's see. Let's try and make this a little bit bigger. The Mishnah Melech, Judah ben Samuel Rosanes, 1657 to 1727, was the rabbi of Constantinople and the son-in-law of the great Rabbi Avraham Rosanes. Right? He, on account of his knowledge of Arabic and Turkish, he was appointed by the government of what's called Chachambashi of the Ottoman Empire. So back in the day when the Ottoman Empire had a little bit more of a progressive and broad and wider thing, they appointed a chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. He was the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, and because he knew both Arabic and Turkish, which was really important because the Ottoman Empire was based in Constantinople. So he has a wild approach. Listen to this. He says, it is not forbidden midoraita to damage another person. Wow. He says there is no one of the 613 commandments that says thou shalt not damage another person. There is nothing in the Torah that forbids me from taking a baseball bat and smashing someone else's window. Wow, that's crazy. He suggests that is a rabbinic prohibition, right? What was he dealing with? A question came to him about, there was a construction company. There was a construction company in a particular part of Constantinople. And what did they do? They dug a hole in a public place. Now, they did it for a good reason. They did it for a good reason. They were trying to lay the foundation to build a bridge. But they dug a hole and they didn't put enough barricades, and somebody fell in and got hurt. So the courts did what they did. But in the discussion, in the royal court, they asked the rabbi, "Hey, is this forbidden according to your religion?" And so he responded, "Yes, you're liable. The construction company has to pay all the costs associated with getting this person back on their feet and paying for the doctor bills and the crutches and whatever they need. And the lost work and lost wages, there are 5 different types of payments such a person needs to pay." But he suggests that nowhere in the Torah is the act they had done forbidden. And his view is that there is no actual explicit prohibition in any one of the 613 commandments that told the construction company that they were doing something illegal. They just did something tortious, right? They did something negligent. And again, here's an interesting question. Suzanne, is this Bal Tashchit? Would that fit with your thing? They built a hole and Suzanne, so what do you think?
It doesn't work when the person himself dug it.
You're saying there is a liable or
There's someone liable, but someone is liable. So
yeah.
The other one is just stupid. What can I do?
No,
Yeah, so Maxine, what do you think?
no, I think, first of all, a person, sometimes he's digging a well because he's afraid there's going to be a flood that's going to come into his house.
Yep,
So
yep.
he's trying to prevent it. That the other thing with the construction company also, it was not intended that anyone was going to fall in. And I think your person is liable religiously when they intend to hurt someone.
Yes,
That's
a really great point. In criminal law, in at least spiritual criminal law, there's something
Right.
called shogeg and mazid. Shogeg means you did it by accident, and you have much less
Right.
punishment. And mazid is when you did something on purpose. That's considered more like rebellion, and that is much more serious in terms of the halacha,
right.
the Jewish law. Great point. So that's what the Mishnah Lamelech is saying. However, the attacks against this approach of the Mishnah Lamelech came fast and furious. For example, can I walk over to somebody and slap them across the face? You're not allowed to do it. Why not? Where is there a prohibition in the Torah to not slap somebody across the face? So interestingly, it comes from a fascinating source. The source that you're not allowed to slap someone across the face comes from the law of the Jewish executioner. Jewish law has a mandate for capital punishment, and they had executioners. Usually it was very, very rare to actually do it, but they also had the job the executioner had. It wasn't always to kill people. It was to give what's called lashes, malkot. And the Torah writes explicitly, a person giving lashes may only give the exact prescribed number of lashes. He can't even give one more. Say the commentaries who argue with the Mishnah Lamelech, that shows that there is a prohibition on hitting someone. Because that is what it's saying. It's saying that the court-appointed lash giver, whatever the title is, the court-appointed punisher is prohibited from hitting someone unless it's in the context of the legally mandated, corporal punishment. So they say, okay, so it's clearly forbidden to hit somebody. And why does it now matter if you hit their body or maybe if you hit their property? Which leads, by the way, to a different theory. A different theory is the concept of thou shalt not steal. Maybe the prohibition to damage someone is because when I run into your house and I grab your purse and I run away, I've stolen something and I've violated thou shalt not steal. Why? Because you had a purse with $100 in it, and now you're out that $100, and I have to pay you back $100. Well, instead of stealing your purse, if I steal the ability to use your arm because I break your arm, you're out that piece of property. And therefore, when I have to pay you, it's really that I'm reimbursing you from that which I have stolen. So perhaps the prohibition of the concept of the idea of the prohibition of damage comes from the concept of thou shalt not steal. Whenever you damage someone, you're stealing from them either their capabilities or their money. There's a similar concept that Kehilas Yaakov, the disciple of Gaon, suggests, which is that it's based on the notion of hashavat aveda. Think about that. There is a command in the Torah, a mitzvah, that you're supposed to return a lost object. What is the implication? If you lose your wallet, and when I see it, I'm responsible to go and give it back to you, is that not how much more so am I not allowed to cause your wallet to be lost by stealing it out of your pocket? So there are those who suggest that the prohibition of damaging comes from the idea of hashev teshivim, of returning a lost object, of hashavat aveda. Suzanne's question is raised by a bunch of different commentaries who say Bal Tashchit. Bal Tashchit means that actually the very technical concept of Bal Tashchit is that when a army is advancing on a enemy, and they are part of their military strategies, they're going to besiege a city that they're fighting against, and there's trees all around that city. It says Lo Tashchit et Eitzah. As part of your military campaign, you are not allowed to just willy-nilly cut down trees. And that concept, Baal is the Aramaic word for lo, for no. Thou shalt not destroy. That concept has expanded into an overall bigger picture philosophical notion of not wasting or destroying for wanted needs that which exists in God's world. So if I can't knock down a tree that's just sitting there, how much more so can I not knock down a right of way that somebody's going to fall into? It's even worse. So maybe Bal Tashchit is what stops me from being able to damage somebody else. By the way, what is rarely suggested, but what you might think is the most obvious prohibition to damage someone, is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Right? If the Torah gives you as one of the 613 commandments, love your neighbor like yourself, well, I wouldn't want my vase smashed, so I probably shouldn't smash somebody else's vase. Indeed, though, there happens to be a very limited application of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is applied in a couple of very unique cases. One of them is the case of capital punishment. When a court imposes capital punishment, it says that the methodology used to kill someone as part of a court needs to be, I would call it, humane. You can't kill someone in a way that will prolong or exacerbate the pain. Why? Because that's a violation of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Interestingly, by the way, there's another time the Talmud uses the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha where it says you're not allowed to get married to someone without having actually gone on dates with them. Why? Because if you don't put in the work of assessing that you're actually compatible in some way, different communities do it to different extents. Some do it very quick, some do it very long. But then you're liable to have a marriage that doesn't conform to v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It doesn't conform to a positive connection with each other, and that's going to be a violation of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So those seem to be uniquely limited expressions, but it's fascinating. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ends up applying. So the consensus of many of the authorities when they try to deal with this is, that's probably not the right source, because otherwise the Talmud would have used it so much more broadly, and it uses it very, very narrowly. The the Brisker Rav has a different suggestion where he goes back to the pasuk we just used. Let's just see if I can get it back there. Right? Let's see here. Let's just see here. I think it's the second aliyah. Let me just see. Just get it back here. Here we go. All right, let's see here, right here. Rav Baruch Ber Leibovitz and the Brisker Rav suggests something much simpler. The Torah says about the famous story about goring. You know what goring is? Goring is when you have an ox or an animal that goes and tramples someone and can kill or hurt them. That's called goring, and that's a famous paradigm of cases in the Jewish law in Masechet Baba Kama. And it says the following: if a bull gores a man or woman and kills somebody, you actually kill the bull because it's very dangerous. But if it is a habitually goring bull, since yesterday and the day before yesterday, what's called a chazaka, right? If you know that this animal is what my rabbi would once call a noxious ox, right? It's an animal that is habitually goring. Shor nagachu. And the owner's warned, hey, your Oswald, your bull here, has been showing signs of real aggressiveness. You better be careful. Velo yishmerenu. But the owner ignores the warning. Ignores the warning about the fact that he has a very dangerous ox in his pen. Velo yishmerenu. And he neglects to do anything about it. Right? He still walks Oswald out in the street and brings red capes in front of him or whatever one does to agitate an axe. Okay? The owner is also liable. Says Rav Baruch Ber Leibovitz, what is this pasuk, this word, velo yishmerenu? That it is contingent on the fact that the owner has not adequately stopped his property from causing damage, which implies that the owner is required to make sure that my property does the damage. These two words, velo yishmerenu, are actually the source of all tort law, according to this approach, which is that you are required to make sure that your property or yourself doesn't hurt anybody else. Which goes to that second level, which how much more so am I also made sure that I'm not allowed to actively go and hurt somebody else? So according to this approach, do you know why, what pasuk, what verse in the Torah says I'm not allowed to go smash someone's windshield with a baseball bat? It's this pasuk. It says that not only am I not allowed, right? I have to make sure that my baseball bats are guarded from damaging somebody. So I'm much more so I've got to make sure that I would never proactively use them to damage someone. And so that's the source of what's called isur lehazik, the prohibition to damage. So we've listed about 5 or 6 different theories. Some are somewhat far-fetched, or some are from far afield, I should say. Far-fetched, by the way, sounds like a Yiddish word, It's, I'm all far-fetched, Anyway, the concept of damage is dealt with in such great extent in the Jewish law, but yet not so much when it comes to the religious law of what is prohibited. So I wanted to share with you an interesting theory, and let's see if I can get it for you here. An essay by a rabbi in Gush Etzion named Rabbi Elchanan Samet, really interesting approach, who basically says the following. He suggests that this is on purpose. It's on purpose. And the reason why he says is because the notion of a laws of torts is what he calls a Jewish moral bill of rights. And perhaps maybe you could make the argument that this is on purpose. The Torah talks about the laws of torts and damages and the care that you must take for someone else, and doesn't associate it with a thou shalt not, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do, on purpose. On purpose. Because this is meant to try and teach us a lesson about our inherent sensibility and caring that we are required to have for one another. And again, I see that word inherent. Inherent means what you do without having been told. That there are consequences to these actions, and we have to realize and deal with them when they're done. I'm sure I didn't. But there's almost a power to saying, be a type of moral community based on all of the 613 mitzvot that doesn't have to be told that you're not allowed to take a baseball bat and smash someone else's vase. It's on purpose that the whole rest of the Torah and the whole set of consequences and laws are dealing with meant to be the exception, not the rule. And the rule is supposed to be inherently within us because of laws like v'ahavta l'reacha k'mocha, because of rules like that. So let's see. Let me just see if I can find it here. Here we go. I'll read it to you in Hebrew, and we'll translate it. Let's see here. I really think it's a very interesting formulation. Let's see. Hopefully you got it here. Make sure. Let me just see if I can get it here to make it correct. Share screen 3. Look what it says here. And I'll read it in Hebrew and translate. Lo lishono shel pasuk ze o acher. It's not that the prohibition to damage is based on this parsuk or that pasuk or this verse or this clause in subsection Q. By the way, it's interesting. If you watch a court case, a criminal court case, it will say you are standing accused of Public Health and Safety Code, paragraph 4, subsection 3. You know, we have to point out exactly which act in the criminal code you have violated. Says Rabbi Salmon, no. Lo lishono shel pasuk ze acher, ela kol hamivneh v'haseder shel parsat hanizikim ba'im lelamdenu. That the entire structure and order of this entire parsha of damages, of laws, lelamdenu is meant to teach us in Masha Rulanu Shnei Agonim, that is what our rabbis, our sages have taught us. Dinei hanizakim enan ma'arechet mishpatit sheno'ada l'sader inyanei mamonot asher nikru ben ish l're'ehu. They are not meant, these laws that I just read and we've gone through in detail, are not meant simply to lay out what we saw in the very beginning, the relief, the details of what happens with the monetary dispute of one person to another. Haseder ha'erki, the moral structure, v'alo mishpati, and not the legal one. Shabo nachta Torah b'parashat zo mebiya in dakrin. There is a fundamental lesson, an inspiration through halacha, if you will, that the Torah is meaning to show. Chayei ha'adam, human life, shleimut gufo, shleimut ginyanav, the completeness, the safety of a person's body, of their property. It doesn't matter if they're the, I'm sorry, did I just lose my, you can still hear me? Whether it's the most important or the least important, so to speak. It's talking about somebody who's high in society or low in society. Everyone has such deep and intense inherent value that is necessary to guard from the damages of others. The idea here is that the amount of ink that is spilled on how you deal with the result of a tort or a damage is meant to teach you the lesson about how valuable everyone's life and liberty is, and how far you need to go to preserve and never hurt anybody else. מפני מעשיו ומחדליו, חיובי הנזקים, אינם במחשב סכסוך כספי שנפל בין אדם לחברו. The rules of this week's parsha are not meant simply to resolve a monetary dispute between A and B. אלא הם משקפים את מגמת התורה. They are meant to teach you the goal the Torah has. להגן על האדם בקניינם מפגיעה, עקב פשיעתו של רעהו. To defend the sacred rights of every human, of every individual, to defend them from potential tortious action of another. Parshat Nezikim Efonkin Megilat Zechuyat Ha'adam. He says, the laws that we read in this week's Parsha are as if they're like a Bill of Rights. Megilat Zechuyot Ha'adam, the Bill of Human Rights. Shemanika Torah Adam, that the Torah gives to people. Then within which are guarded his life, his liberty, and the completeness of his body and property. Rabbi Posy is saying 2 points. The first point he's saying is we shouldn't be looking at this in terms of is it right or wrong, and oh my gosh, the Torah never said you're not allowed to slam somebody. You're not allowed to, smash someone's vase or break their windshield. That's not what the focus is meant to be. The focus is meant to be is look how much we care about the victim. And what we don't focus on is wagging our finger at the perpetrator, but victims' rights are so important, whether you're the highest person in society or the seemingly appearance to be lowest. We care about making sure that your freedom and care is guarded. So what we do is we put a system of consequences to make sure nobody would ever consider the possibility of hurting you. So this, in a strange way, this parsha is addressed to the victim, not necessarily addressed to the damager, which is why the Torah doesn't say, thou shalt not do this, thou not shalt do that, because you're not the audience. The audience is the Bill of Rights of every human being who is endowed with the right to safety, endowed with the right to keep their property. Interestingly, and therefore he says that's why there's no pasuk. There is a concept that if you look in the curricular education of young children, there's a fascinating trend that you'll find in many educational institutions. And this is going back many years, that what they'll often teach in very young ages is these laws, the laws of torts and damages, all of these things. And Rabbi Feinstein once wrote an essay about this. He says, do you know why? Why are these laws taught to young children before you teach them the laws of Kiddush or the laws of prayer or the laws of what bracha to make? He says, do you know why? Because we must inculcate at the very basic level of education a foundational concept that you got to care about making sure that you never hurt anybody else. That that's in terms of the message to children. Care about, as they say, sharing is caring, and make sure that you never, act in a way that is negligent. So that's the reason why we don't focus on, is it permitted? We're not sending this as a religious lesson. We're sending it as a fundamental moral set of rights that is given to every human, which, by the way, would lead to our Jewish prohibition against discrimination. It comes from that same core message of everyone is endowed with the Tselem Elokim, and if someone has is built with the image of God, you can't act in ways that are negative to them. And so that's the reason this approach, this Rabbi Samet suggests that you don't find, and you got to look over here and over there and over there and there to be able to find the prohibition of damaging, because it's really meant about, again, this sense of the Bill of Rights. So I thought that's a fascinating and true, inspiring way of understanding the concept of the laws of torts and damages. And, it leads to this sense of values that I think is very true to the Jewish philosophy. Yes, Suzanne, go ahead. You're muted. You're muted. 1 second. We need you. We need to hear you. We don't hear you. 1 second. We're not hearing you. There you go.
Every time you say that, I don't catch who wrote this.
Oh, this is Rabbi Samet. He's a contemporary author from Gush Etzion. Samet, Rabbi Elchanan Samet.
It has contemporary language. When he says mechdalav, it shows that it's his inability to know something. It's because he's not woke, as I say now, because he's not clever. So we have to guard from this stupidity. And the moment, for me, it's so self-evident. Maybe it's because I'm Jewish, I don't know. The thing is, why don't we teach children from the beginning on how to be careful about causing damage? Don't you think it would take care of the anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, and everything else?
No, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. And that, in fact, Moshe Feinstein was saying, yeah.
Love, and we don't. And we don't take off the deficiency of the people.
Yeah.
The whole, this is the problem with the American Constitution. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so go ahead, Maxine.
No, as a parent, I did. I mean, obviously, and I would tell my kids not only don't hurt another child. If you go into someone's house, you don't open a drawer, you don't go into anything. And some of the kids in the neighborhood would come into our house and do that. And I would tell my kids that's wrong.
Yeah. And the educational aspect is really important here. Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I just wanted to wish everybody a great Shabbat Shalom. There was supposed to be a lecture tonight, but it's been postponed. Unfortunately, the lecturer is under the weather. But we'll reconnect. But there's a lot of really exciting programming coming up. So look forward to learning and seeing everybody soon.
And the vaccine is easy.
Oh, good. Good to hear.